Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're from. I'm Don Gertz, and I'm here with my friend Greg DeMarco, and we have a visitor with us, Chris
Hey,
Back-
you did,
Backerberg.
Backerberg.
Did I say that right, Chris? Backerberg. Yeah, that's good. That's good. I wanted to make sure I got it right, because it's easy for me to mock, Greg, because we've been doing this for quite a while, but I didn't want to
Well,
have too
feel
much fun
free. The
with the new
post
guy.
office is doing it for years. I get
Anyway,
Blackbird, Blackberry. I've had people change my name in front of me and put an N in. Yeah, I'm spelling it wrong.
just
They wanted
because
to
you were
make
spelling
sure
it
I
wrong,
did
is
it.
that the idea?
Meet people, meet people where they're at, huh?
Like, yeah, I think that's an interesting story because I think it ties into our topic today. Today we're talking about connecting always requires energy, and it's one of the chapters in the John Maxwell book, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. And I think it really takes some energy to talk to somebody or to listen to somebody and actually hear what their name is, and then to remember their name. But anyway, so it's interesting that you have it. I mean, you should hear what they do in my name, But anyway,
It's the same. It's the same with me too. I get it with DeMarco. For some reason, they just want to call me Marco. So
well, you look like a Marco.
I know that's the thing. It's that whole Italian thing. But I'm half Scottish, so I don't know what happens to the other half. But whatever.
There you go. There you go. So, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect is a great book by John C. Maxwell, and we recommend that everybody read it because when we're in sales, in our context has been mostly sales. When we're in sales, it's all about building relationships, and part of building relationships is communication. The better we communicate, the better our relationships are going to be. And so John has this as a book, and each one has a different title. But one of the principles that he talks about is that it requires energy, and he emphasizes the idea that effective communication and connection demand, an intentional effort, both physically and emotionally, And what's your thoughts on that, Greg? What's your takeaway on that?
Well, it's a good topic. Communication is key for a lot of things, and if we're putting it in the context of sales, and we're looking at real estate sales, for example, there's so many factors I think that sort of wrap up into this communication or understanding it, and it does take a lot of energy, especially for people who might be introverted, who need, who just take a lot of energy to deal with people, and a lot of it has to do, I think, with you have to put a lot of effort into this, and you have to prepare.
It's interesting. My wife is she gets her energy from other people.
Yeah.
So she adds a lot of energy to a conversation. Whereas you mentioned the introvert like me, the energy, it sucks when I have to expend that energy. That depletes my energy source. So it worked exactly the opposite. I have to take time to replenish myself after.
You mean when you're in groups of people and stuff, or having to deal with people? Yeah.
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 So like having back-to-back appointments, I learned, in real estate, and Chris, you'll recognize this, but I could never understand why people, when they had somebody come in to look at
Oh,
houses,
yeah,
that
yeah.
they would schedule them for the whole day. I could never stand being with them. I mean, I shouldn't say that out loud, but it was difficult for me to be that with somebody that long, because it just that the energy. I just had to have something in between. I had to have a break in between from
I think that's
anything,
right.
in order to
I think
recharge
it's knowing your
myself.
own capacity
So
and then weighing up the capacity of whoever you're with. And I love the piece that Maxwell talks about this all the weighing up sort of how things are going and calling it. And I've done that. Showing houses. We've had 6 on the list. We got to number 4, and I've checked in and say, look, I want to check in because we've seen 4 houses. I know you want to see 6. We can reschedule, but how are you guys doing? Because it's a lot to take in. There's a lot of moving parts. And then I'll say, can you differentiate between the first 2 you saw? Because I noticed you haven't been taking notes, and I got to tell you,
yeah,
for me, even,
yeah,
and I do this full time. 4, 5, 6, they start to run into each other. So it's a check-in that I do.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. So one of the main points is that connection requires effort. How does that apply in your sales experience, Greg?
Well, you've made a great point about being an introvert, and although I'm kind of an introvert and I'm kind of an extrovert in certain ways. If I'm like in my sales career, if you see like 3 or 4 clients in a day, that's getting up there to, like when we used to go, like I was in the yacht business, and if we were at a trade show, and then you're seeing like 10 appointments in that day, you're just like, oh my God, it can be. I prepared completely before each, like the night before. You have to do that. If you don't prepare, like I would know what they were actually looking for, what I had needed to show them, what options, and so that the effort was there, but it didn't take a lot of effort because I was prepared. If you're trying to wing it, if you're trying to go into a situation where, okay, I'll just wing this, you're going to fail. 9 times out of 10, I think you're going to fail.
So you were intentional about how you were going to approach that day. I mean, every circumstance is going to be different.
Yeah, but you have to. I
Yeah,
think
so
you have to.
so at a conference or something like that, where you have to meet a lot of people, you have to be prepared and intentional about how you're going to approach each client.
Yeah, and even in when you look at the real estate, which is what we're talking about, I think that regardless, if you're going to meet a client tomorrow, even if it's just one, you have to be prepared in order to take them. You don't want to waste their time. You don't want to waste your own. But if you want a better connection with them, you have to put the effort in. And I think this leads to something else that we need to get into, and we'll get into it during this conversation. But it leads into the specific things that we do as human beings to connect with other human beings. And we can talk about that, but this whole effort and intentionality is a key point, because if somebody doesn't think that you're prepared, they're not going to think that you really want to be with them.
Or trust you to carry the decision making that they're in the process. In other words, so the sale of a house, obviously, confidence in that's going to be a box people check consciously or unconsciously pretty quickly around.
Can I trust this? Can I trust this person?
Yeah.
Well,
it always comes down to that, though, right? It always comes down to the trust factor.
I think preparation is huge. And it's going to vary from, so I was a therapist for 20 years, and I would see 8 or 9. 9 was usually my limit. But because we work in a structure, a clinical structure, there's a safety in there. So I'm not winging it per se. I clinically and ethically am bound to stay within a certain range. Now, real estate is a different animal. Although what I've learned over the last few years is I work within a structure too, and I think it's expected that I work within a structure in terms of how people, what they expect from me when I meet them. And so I look for that, but it's taken me a bit of time to really put that together. What is that? What does that look like? I know clinically for a therapist what that looks like, and I know the danger of burnout when you're working outside of that structure. You're doing something else. You're doing something socially, maybe, not professionally, in my opinion. And we used to have clinical supervision on that topic all the time. I am a counselor.
But you're the counselor. Well, one of the things that, when you talk about structure, I noticed, one of the things I noticed is that I think structure gives you freedom in a lot of ways. We had my partner and I, when I was an owner of a real estate office, we hired a new general manager, or a new manager for our office, a new broker owner. And about 2 weeks after we hired this new broker owner, or new broker manager, we hired a consultant. And this consultant came in and he virtually ripped everything up that we were doing, and then gave us all new job descriptions, all new job titles, and all that kind of stuff. And he created a structure. He created a hierarchy of, for our office. And after the first day, after the first meeting with him, I think it was a long meeting. I was ready to tell my partner, I said, "Get rid of this guy. I don't want to see him." But it was difficult because I mean, I think it was difficult for our new manager because he had come with, we had told him what to expect, and then all of a sudden we hire some guy, and he comes in and he starts changing everything. But it was that after we did all that, after I stuck it out for the week that the consultant was there, and after we did that and we had the structure, we had a lot more freedom to grow and to become a better office. And I think that's the same thing in sales. If you don't want to be robotic about what you do, but when you are entering into a sales conversation with somebody, and you have a structure of sorts to go through, then you have the opportunity to and the freedom to actually build on that relationship, I think, in a
I
better
agree
way.
100%. And
Yeah.
I believe, and this was the same clinically, but here in real estate, I'm building that structure with whoever's in front of me because it looks different for each person. They have their ways and means, but what I have learned, or what I believe wholeheartedly, is whether we like it or not, even adolescents, they actually like structure. And we do as humans. You know why? Because
Yeah,
it gives that
yeah,
freedom you spoke of. Now I know my range. Now I know my range in this relationship. And it turns out there's a lot more range in a given structure because I have expectations around where the barriers or boundaries or limits might be. In terms of, this guy's not my lender,
yeah,
he's my realtor. They're different.
yeah. But you also have to have within your structure. I think you also
Yes.
have to have the opportunity to explore, and to try, because without exploring, we have no
Well,
growth,
there's the
right? So
building a relationship.
so I think the structure goes along with the still, being consistent. When we're consistent in our approach, when we're consistent in our effort of meeting people and trying to build connection, we're working within that structure. Is that something you've seen, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, consistency is key always when it comes to anything we do, especially when it comes to sales. Once you find something that works, you should stick to it, but always be open to learning something new because, things change. So we have to change along with it. But I mean, we get back to the
Mhm.
actual connecting of people, and we get back into that environment of, who's in front of us. There are a lot of things that I think with this consistency of effort and the energy that we expand through our own intentionality, I think that there are some key points that have to be made. And what I've always found, especially when I am connecting with people, and I do this often, is little things like body language, smiling, eye contact. That's right, Don. You got it. I knew you could smile.
Yeah, but you don't fake it, right?
Yeah,
Don't fake it.
yeah. Don't fake it. But remembering names, saying thank you. But one of the main things is standing up straight, shoulders back, and being confident. Because that, my friends, goes a long way. And for me, I always had problems remembering names. I don't know why. Faces, no problems. Names, I always had an issue. So what I had to start doing was just saying, "Oh, hi. Sorry, I'm Greg DeMarco. What's your name?" And, "Oh, it's Chris." "Oh, hi, Chris." And I say their name and I shake their hand. That's how I sort of imprint that into my head. And I say their
Yeah.
name often through the conversation. Because when you say somebody's name, when you actually say it, they listen because you're saying pay attention in a certain way. That's what you're doing. But they'll actually remember you. And at the end, I always say thank you. I'm grateful for the business, or thank you. I'm grateful for the sale. And that makes them feel. And this goes back to fundamental emotional side of us humans. It makes them feel special. It makes them feel something, and they tend to remember you. Most salespeople don't do that anymore. They'll say thank you, shake your hand, and walk away. But I make a point of looking them in the eye and saying, you know what, I thank you very much. I'm very grateful for the business you're giving me. I want you to know that. And I look at them and I smile, and they stop and they look at, and I know I just made an impression. I can tell. And they have a tendency to ask for you the next time.
Yeah, that has to be done with sincerity too, though.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have. Uh, you guys are all old, just maybe not quite as old as I am, but you remember the old show Leave It to Beaver?
Yeah.
There was the one character on there, Eddie Haskell.
Yeah, Eddie Haskell.
Eddie Haskell would always come in and say, "You look lovely today, Mrs. Cleaver." And all he was doing, he was just sucking up to Mrs. Cleaver. But so there wasn't any sincerity, but it was always funny to see. But when you're greeting people like you're saying, and saying stuff like what you just said, how you appreciate their business, you have to be sincere about that. You have to really be grateful.
Yeah.
And we should be grateful. We can't think that we're all that in a bag of hammers, but
no, but that word grateful is not often used. So I used it. I don't say thank you, just thank you for the business. I say I'm very grateful for the sale today. Thank you. And that seems to go a long way. I've sort of tested things over the years, and that seems to be very effective.
Yeah, gratitude helps with our attitude.
Well, that's a John Maxwell
I've heard it
thing.
say gratitude is it's an action. It's I was thinking as you guys were talking, the amount of energy I put into connecting it, and I'm thinking about that here more, and it's like really driven by my purpose for being there and why I'm connecting. Big why, like why am I actually connecting? And if I'm clear on that, which I am, for me personally, it brings me back to the action of connecting. And I remember the other day I was working with a guy and we were talking, and what I noticed, he was very conscious of space between us, and I made some adjustments and he relaxed in that. And I was so grateful that I was aware of that, because it really helped him in part of his process of, is he going to sign a buyer broker agreement with me? Which was one of my sub purposes as a business person, but that's not my ultimate purpose. My ultimate purpose is, can I be of service to this person? And I'm coming from something different. And then, business decisions are sort of underneath that. But for me personally, if I'm not coming from that higher purpose, then I'm just going through the motions. And that's problematic. In the wrong line if I'm doing that for too long anyways.
Yeah, but that's all.
Yes.
That's all part of the connection, right? So if you have the right purpose or you have the right intentions, and they're not selfish intentions, and you approach it with gratitude, you're probably going to make a better impression. And I liked what you said there about about the fellow that you were talking to. You were too much in or he was conscious of his space. And it reminded me of the Seinfeld episode with Kramer.
Close talkers.
Close talkers, yeah. The guy's just right up in his face, that could, it can be, like another thing is some people are huggers, right? And then with men, that they can be a camaraderie, but then how long is that hug supposed to be, right?
Yeah, that's right. That brings back some memories. But yeah, I think the whole, listen, it doesn't matter whether you're selling real estate, yachts, books, or furniture, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's the people element that is the great equalizer across all things. If you're dealing with businesses and you're B2B, it's still people you're dealing with in those businesses, regardless. And I think sometimes what happens when we go into these sales conversations, when it goes to B2B or B2C and what is this and what is that, they try and make it a whole. And there are processes. You're dealing with policies and procedures, of course, in a business. But there's no real difference. When people have policies and procedures, they just call them something different. They have morals and ethics or whatever it is. Doesn't matter. It's all to do with people and how do you deal with people and how do you communicate. And that's what it comes down to in the end is this whole notion of communication and how we connect with people. And there are certain things that work over other things. And being intentional about it and prepared is a very key factor in that whole process.
So being intentional about our connection is important. Body language is important. You talked about, the way that we stand. We talked about smiling at people, and, we talked about other things. What about the way we're dressed?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that, yeah, I think everybody has a friggin' style, though. Seriously. Everybody has their own style. And who am I to tell someone they should be wearing a three-piece suit with a tie and if you're selling real estate and yachts versus someone coming in casually dressed? I think it's what you feel most comfortable with for yourself. But I typically like to dress nicely. I'll wear a nice pair of slacks. It depends on your climate too, but I'll wear a nice shirt tapered or a nice shoes. I like to look good, and that makes me feel better about myself when I'm clean. But some people are okay with golf shirts, shorts, and thongs like sandals. So
That's a
I think
great
it's up
great
to
topic
you.
though, and we've had
But
this recently. We're living in the age of the selfie. People seem to be never more conscious of how one looks. And I'm going to tell you, I do dress up and down based on what my gut's telling me in this market. I just do. And the
Yeah.
reason I do this is I'm making efforts to meet you on your grounds. So whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. I sort of go with it. Now, I'm not talking about a great variation, and I don't wear ties. I wear ties to funerals and weddings, maybe, but I'm very conscious of what I'm putting on. And I think it's a great topic. I think, because I do know when people miss the mark with what they wear.
Yeah.
I'm conscious.
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
it helps with our connection. I was listening to some training the other day, and they were talking about how we, first impressions, and they said that the way we dress is important, and they suggested that that we should dress just one step above. So, for example, if somebody is wearing casual, then we should be wearing business casual. If someone's wearing business casual, then we should, just maybe put on a coat or something like that. So I think, what Chris was saying there about, depending on who he's meeting with, some people are very casual. We had one guy in our office. He had a big, huge beard, and he was a rugby player. So if you know what rugby players are like, they're kind of gruff and everything. He always wore a rugby shirt and a pair of cargo short pants.
Mhm.
So that was what he wore. And that was his personality. That was his style,
Mhm.
and his clients absolutely adored him. So it was never a problem. He did a lot of business, and so it works. It works different for everybody. Like Greg says, it's personal style is personal style. But if you're not certain, then there is a rule of thumb that if the and they were talking more in terms of being a presenter, in a presentation environment, so that if everybody was business casual, you should be a little bit better than that. If they're casual, then you should be business casual. So, but I think it's important. It's an important thing to think about and plan. If you ask, and I don't think you want to ask your clients either, because if you ask your clients, most of them are just going to say, well, whatever you feel comfortable with, right? But I think it does leave a favorable impression. So John Maxwell says first impressions are important,
I think that's
and you
right.
got about 15
And I think
seconds.
congruence.
Yeah.
So back to your rugby friend,
I
I think
agree.
there's a congruency that people sense. They can see him get out of his car, and then they get his energy, and then he opens his mouth and starts talking, and they're like, "Oh, that's congruent." There's something there. There's a comfort level that he
That's right.
pervades in his
Yeah.
the way he presents to the world. And what does that take? Awareness, experience, being fully present. I mean, there's so many gifts that various teachings give us. I mean, I've been thinking about this the whole time. When I can't remember someone's name, it's because I wasn't fully present when they were telling me. Really, I mean, that's what that means to me. I need to and that takes energy and practice. That's
Yeah.
You try being fully present all day, you'll go home and go to bed early.
Oh, it's
And
tough. It is tough.
well, it's like
It's a
training
mental,
muscles.
it's
It's
a mental
muscle.
strain,
It's
right?
practice because it does. It's like meditating. At first, it's never, and then all of a sudden, it's a muscle. There are muscles. There are
So I,
certain, I think, and that's been my experience with it. And being present, that's a real, because that's a gift to anybody. That I'm, if I can be fully present for you, that's beautiful. That's a good thing. That's about.
so it takes intentionality. So that's really what it comes down to, is that to connect with people, it takes energy, and we have to be intentional about our energy. Well, I want to thank you guys for your conversation today. It's been, I think, beneficial, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed
Thank you
the
for inviting me. I
conversation. And
appreciate
thank you,
that.
Chris, for joining us. It's Yeah, and it's
It
always
is.
good to see my
And
friend
I get
Greg
to see
DeMarco.
him in about a week,
Um,
actually, physically. He is. We've created
he's gonna come
space.
down
I've
to visit
alerted the
you in New
media.
Mexico.
Yeah.
That's good. That's
Just
good.
you're gonna have the
Yeah, the
old
governor
red
will be
carpet
there.
rolling down the
The
street
governor
for
will
me, are
be
you?
there.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Oh, nice.
So so thank you for listening. And if you like what you heard, like and subscribe and leave us a comment, leave us a question, and we'd be happy to try to answer that question for
God
you.
bless.
So
Take care.
take care,
Bye.
and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.